they want a survey, they want an appraisal to see what the value is without the portion that you're releasing, then we can actually draft that legal description to release that portion.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Real Estate Show. I'm Tiffany Weber, a real estate attorney at Thomas & Weber with a couple locations in North Carolina, and I am joined by my fellow attorney, Megan Anderson. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
So excited to have you here today. This topic that we're talking about, I don't understand how almost every time we get called about this topic, you end up working on it.
Yeah, I've become quite familiar with them.
That's why you are this is probably why you proposed this topic. And I was like, oh, that's a really good one.
Yeah.
Because it's personal to you at this point.
It is.
And we're going to talk about how to get a partial release from your mortgage.
Yes.
So start with just explaining to me, what is a partial release? What does that even mean?
So typically when you buy a property, you encumber the whole property with a mortgage, with a loan, saying that holding the property as collateral. Mm-hmm. And depending on how big your property is, in the future, if you choose to do so, you can subdivide it. You can break it up into smaller sections, depending on county zoning and things like that. If you're wanting either to do something with a portion of it that your lender might not agree with or isn't approved with the lender, you could potentially release that portion from the loan, from the collateral for you to do whatever you want with that.
Yeah. It's basically like making it so the loan doesn't apply to that part anymore.
Right.
There's a lot of different contexts in which you would want the partial release, and you already said like most of them. A few others I could think of is if you're a builder and you got a development that's encumbered, and as you sell the lots off, you need those lots released. That's probably the one thing that I was thinking like, oh yeah, that's another common scenario. I had someone reach out a couple months ago. They didn't want a specific portion of the property released. They wanted a specific percentage interest in the property released. Scenario, parent wanted to convey as joint tenants with rights to survivorship a percentage interest to kids. That's a tough legal description to draft for what's being released.
Right.
Came back that the lender wouldn't approve it because the idea is that, oh, okay, well, if we have to foreclose, if we got rid of a specific portion of the property, no problem. Right. But we still encumber the entire property except for the interest of these children. So if we have to foreclose, then we're going to have to get a partition action. And, it was something minors, having never been asked that scenario before, it wasn't something that I had considered of. And they were adults, but they... even so, their portion not being encumbered, you can't sever an undivided percentage interest.
Right.
You have that undivided percentage interest in the entire piece of the property, not just like, here's your 1% dot, here's my 1%,
Right. It's not solidified to a specific area. It's just the ownership percentage. Yeah. It's kind of...
It was an interesting one.
It
was a law school question,
Right.
If I ever get to live my dream of being a professor, that I need to remember that scenario to put, let me just put this out into the universe. Dream of mine to be a professor. So if there's any people looking for an adjunct professor of
You're gonna
real
get
estate
so many
law,
phone calls now.
I highly doubt it. But, what does the kids say these days? Manifesting?
Yeah.
I'll
put it
try
into the universe. It is there.
Now, talk me through this process that you know intimately well by now. How do you request a partial release?
Okay. So first you have to figure out which portion of your property you are wanting to subdivide. So the easiest way to look at it is if, you have 10 acres, family plot, 10 acres, you're going to do, what's coming into style, all the barn dominiums, all the family compounds. You're going to deed individual lots to your children or grandchildren, things like that. Yeah. So let's say from the 10 acres, you have a loan on all 10 acres. You're going to take lot by lot as you release it, because the lenders do require, a portion down, loan to value, things like that. So first step is to figure out what you want to release. Get a surveyor out there, resurvey the property, which portion, and maybe if you're going to potentially release a lot more, you go ahead and get that up front. Record that with the county, make sure everything is approved with the county that you want to do moving forward. And then, contacting your local real estate agent, making sure they are good, your realtor. And if you're going to sell it, if you're just keeping it in the family, then just your attorney to draft a partial release. And then getting into contact with your lender.
Yeah, all of that is kind of assuming that your lender will allow this process. So most of the time, by the time they've called us, the lender has been involved already. So and if they haven't, you tell them, call your lender.
Yes, making sure your lender has already approved it. So they have their own process to abide by. They want a survey. They want an appraisal to see what the value is without the portion that you're releasing, making sure that their numbers are matched up. Depending on, their servicing companies, they might require you to pay down a portion of the loan to make sure that value looks good just for any type of release.
Yeah.
I don't have a percentage because it depends on who your lender is. So once you have figured out the lender requirements, qualifications, then we can actually draft that legal description to release that portion. So we have to have the lender's approval because they are the ones who sign the release. Lender has to sign off on that portion that is released, and then we can record it with the county, completely severing that portion of property from your encumbered mortgage property. You're still the owner of all the properties. It's just one portion doesn't have a loan on it. The other portion does.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the appraisal. That's an often overlooked part of the process. And it's also another good point that every lender is different. But for the sake of example, let's assume when you buy the property, it's worth $100,000. You got some vacant land. It's worth $100,000. You got your lender's requirement is that they will not lend you more than 80% of the loan to value. So they will not lend you more than $80,000 on this. And then 10 years go by, and that property that was worth $100,000 is now worth $600,000 or more thousand.
Right.
Due to whatever, all kinds of reasons, market factors. Maybe you built on it, whatever.
Gold.
And then you go to your lender and want part of it released. Well, they're looking at the loan to value ratio. So if you borrowed $80,000 and you owe $30,000 on what is now worth $600,000 property, probably not going to be as difficult to get it released.
Not right there.
If you bought that same property 2 months ago and now you're trying to divide it in half and you want half of it released and you owe $79,000 on it, much more difficult. The lender's likely going to require you, as you said, to put some money in to get those loan to value ratios right, because maybe they've assigned a value of it that each acre is worth $50,000, so you need to be at $40,000. Right. What you're owed for us to be able to consider getting rid of this, but every lender's different.
Yeah.
Every single one.
I would definitely make sure you ask those questions up front. What fees are involved? What, is there going to be any down payment or, payment required before you go through all the effort to survey it, things like that, which you most likely will survey it first after you talk to the lender. Yeah. So make sure that you at least have a ballpark figure up front from your lender before you get too involved if it's not really going to be in your favor to go through with that release.
Yeah, I mean, even if the lender requires you to get an appraisal, that doesn't mean they're saying yes, but you're still going to have to pay for it. Everybody that's involved in this process is getting paid what they're getting paid for their work, not the outcome. Surveyors getting paid for doing a survey. Attorneys getting paid for drafting the documents. appraiser's getting paid for appraising it, and so on and so forth. So you have to keep that in mind that no outcome is promised. So if you haven't run it by your lender from the outset, then you could be thousands and thousands of dollars in and get a no.
Right.
Or find out that it's a yes, but they need many more thousands of dollars in order to do so, and you're stuck. You may not have the ability to do that. So I think probably the through line in all of this is don't assume that it's an easy path with your lender or that it's a slam dunk and they'll say yes.
Right. So just a little caveat. So if you get to that part and you realize that, oh, the lender does require me to put $30,000 into the release portion, and you've been planning all along to sell said, 2.5 acres. Point. So you can still subdivide it. It'll just be considered as a release, canceling that portion.
Just like a payoff.
Paying off the portion required by the lender from the sale proceeds of that portion that you've sold.
It's a really good point. I'd forgotten about that. We would have pressed recently. The end of record, and I was like, I would have been like, oh, but. Yeah. So I'm glad that you're way ahead of me.
that might have happened recently. We don't know.
Yeah. And this is why you are our internal go-to on this, because you have, it seems like every other day you're dealing with this. Partial releases can be extremely complicated. They don't have to be, but I think you've like pretty clearly set up what the process is. A lot of moving parts, and it's not quick.
Yeah.
What's the fastest you've ever seen one?
So probably from us being initiated into the process to actually having it signed and released, it was probably less than 30 days, which is actually fairly quick.
Yeah. Did the borrower, our client, had already done all the legwork with the lender?
Yes. So all it needed was the lender just needed to sign after we drafted it.
Yeah.
And they got it signed and overnighted back to us fairly quickly. Mm-hmm. They review them first, obviously, make sure their signature lines match what they actually need to be signing, because every lender is different on who's signing for their documents.
Yeah.
And then after that, came back within a week. We sent it out. They signed it. We got it back and recorded it shortly after that. So
yeah, that's the dream scenario.
And I don't think that particular client was required to pay down anything. I think the value and the appraisal came back in his favor. So
yeah, and there's probably some that you're still working on from many, many months ago.
Yes.
So it's all there's no one size fits all, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, Megan, thank you so much for taking me through that process. I always love having you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you.